Welcome back to Historical Secrets, where we peel away the layers of time to discover how the past is still whispering into the present. Tonight, I want you to take a look around. The way you eat, the way you greet, even the reason you sit at the table like this, all carry traces of medieval thinking. It may sound ancient, but those rules still quietly guide us every day, and most of us don't even realize it. If you enjoy journeys that take us from the present back to centuries long past where everything began, hit like, subscribe, and stay until the end of the video, because tonight's conclusion will make you see your modern life in a completely new way. Now, let the night fall, dim the lights a little, and let's step into a world where ancient rules still bind the present without any of us realizing it. Wonderful. You are stepping into one of the most fascinating topics that Historical Secrets has ever touched. The medieval rules that still exist in our modern lives, even though most of us are completely unaware of them. Imagine your morning. The alarm clock rings, you spring out of bed, coffee in hand, open your computer, and start a long day from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. A schedule that seems modern and reasonable, but in reality, it was born not from factories or the industrial world, but from monasteries. In medieval Europe, when most of the population didn't even know what time it was, monks lived in a different world, a world governed by bells. Bells rang to wake them, to eat, to pray, to repent, and even to remind them that it was time to regret their decision to become monks. Their lives were such a strict loop that each hour of the day had its own name: matins, lauds, prime, terce, sext, nun, vespers, compline, sounding more like forbidden spells from Harry Potter than a religious schedule. Whenever the bell rang, all activities stopped. No one was allowed to choose the timing. The issue was not productivity, but obedience. Precision and submission were seen as the path to salvation, and this sacred hour system inadvertently sowed the seeds for the later concept of working hours. Gradually, the outside world was affected. Monastery bells became the community clock. Towns set market hours, guilds set work schedules, and eventually factories during the Industrial Revolution followed suit. By then, people had merely swapped the monk's robe for a suit and replaced prayers with performance reports. The 9 to 5 life you live is a secularized version of the monastery. Only difference is no one blesses you when you meet a deadline. Ironically, even your lunch break originates from the monk's sext hour, when they paused work to have a snack and pray. So the next time you sigh at noon, remember, you're not working modern. You are reenacting an 800-year-old religious ritual. And it's not just time. Our social reflexes also carry medieval imprints, such as how we react when someone sneezes. Have you ever wondered why people say bless you? It sounds like politeness, but in fact, it was a ritual to ward off evil. In the 6th century, when the plague swept across Europe, every sneeze could be a sign of death. People believed the soul could escape through the nose, giving demons a chance to enter. Pope Gregory the Great, with a spirit of both fear and pragmatism, issued a decree. People must say, bless you after someone sneezed, to ask for divine protection for the soul that had almost escaped. Thus, in every village, town, and meal, blessings followed each sneeze. Imagine the scene: church bells ringing, roosters crowing at dawn, and dozens of people chanting, bless you, just because someone inhaled pollen. It was a community ritual, half religious, half superstitious, and it has survived to this day. You may laugh, but every time you blurt out that phrase, you are repeating a 1400-year-old ritual designed to keep demons out of your sinuses. And the irony is, today we know the only thing escaping during a sneeze is hundreds of thousands of bacteria at 100 miles per hour. Yet instead of running away, we bless it. Then there's the dining table, where you think you are being polite, but in fact you are sitting in a medieval moral revolution. The small, shiny utensil you use daily, the fork, was once seen as a tool of Satan. When the Byzantine nobility brought it to Europe in the 11th century, the church was outraged. Clerics claimed God had given humans the perfect eating tool, their fingers. Using metal instead of flesh was considered blasphemy. A Byzantine princess was even accused of sacrilege simply for daring to use a golden fork. When she died of plague, priests declared it God's punishment. For centuries, Europeans, even the nobility, ate with their hands like prehistoric hunters, simply out of fear of committing a sin. It wasn't until the Italians turned the fork into a symbol of refinement in the 17th century that the rest of Europe agreed to use it. And of course, the English were the last to submit, only after enough prominent figures used forks publicly to legitimize the act. Think about that. The next time you twirl spaghetti with your shiny fork, you are performing an action that was once considered heretical. And if you think modern bachelor parties are chaotic, you clearly haven't heard of the medieval version. When marriage was merely a financial contract, men could not resist the idea of a last night of freedom. Knights gathered in taverns, drank until helmets no longer fit, gambled away horses, and pledged allegiance to liberty before collapsing into barrels of beer. The church called it a festival of sin. But of course, no one listened. These parties became symbols of rebellion before marriage, spreading from nobility to commoners. And you, raising a glass to toast your friend about to marry, are continuing a tradition thousands of years old, the tradition of organized regret. From monastery bells to sneeze blessings to the fork in your hand, everything in modern life carries the shadow of the Middle Ages. The world changes, science progresses, but ancient rules cling to our minds like vines. And perhaps the most frightening thing is not that we are still living by these rules, but that we don't even realize it. Welcome to the modern era, where everything is new, except ourselves. Perhaps the strangest thing is not that we still follow medieval rules, but the way we believe we have surpassed them. Every time you hear someone say, "I don't care what others think of me," you are witnessing a historical lie, because an entire social system was built to make you care. And it all started with the church. In the medieval world, appearance was just as important as belief. People believed that outward form reflected the soul within. So every action, every expression, every gesture had to follow a moral standard. If you appeared too happy, too confident, or too different, it could be seen as a sign of pride, one of the seven deadly sins. So people learned to play the role of virtue. They smiled at the right time, bowed just enough, and prayed long enough to go unnoticed. Sounds familiar? In the age of social media, we are still living in a modern version of the same system. The only difference is that instead of trying to impress God, we try to impress the algorithm. Every action is calculated, every emotion must be naturally intentional. You no longer need a church to feel guilty. Just open your comment section. Just like in the Middle Ages, public image remains more important than the person themselves. Today we call it personal branding, social norms, or corporate culture. But in essence, it is still the same mask your ancestors wore during Easter 8 centuries ago, only now color corrected and filmed in 4K. One of the subtlest legacies of the Middle Ages that few realize is the sense of guilt when resting. People once believed that laziness, sloth, was a deadly sin, and that notion has been deeply imprinted on Western consciousness. From monks to peasants, everyone was taught that labor is glory, that the body must not stop moving because it was a sign of spiritual decay. And even in the 21st century, millions still torment themselves for not being productive enough. In reality, you are not living in a modern busy era. You are living in a virtual monastery. Your work schedule has been replaced by emails, meetings, and deadlines, but the purpose remains the same: to prove that you deserve to exist. The only difference is that instead of church bells, you are now awakened by phone notifications. In the same spirit of control, the Middle Ages left us with something everyone knows but no one admits: the fear of judgment. When the church ruled, every mistake, no matter how small, could be seen as a sign of sin. People lived in fear of being seen, not just by God, but by neighbors, family, and even themselves. Today, we call it cancel culture. We no longer use heresy courts, but the mechanism is exactly the same: a public accusation, a community demanding repentance, and a form of social exile disguised as morality. It is the medieval version without religion, where you are burned online instead of on a pyre. This does not mean modern society is worse, just disturbingly familiar. We are still seeking salvation, only now through likes, shares, and subscribers instead of through mass. And if you think today's social rules are less religious, think again every time you hear a phone ring in class, on the bus, or in a movie theater. The sense of guilt, shame, and silence that follows, that is a medieval reflex. Back then, when church bells rang, people had to stop and bow. Today, when a phone rings, you stop, fumble to grab it, bow your head, and hope no one notices. Even the language of power we use carries the breath of the Middle Ages. Words like lord, servant, superior, serve all originate from the feudal system, interface updated to suit modern times. Instead of the church, we have the office. Instead of vassals, we have employees. Instead of taxes, we have utility bills. The power structure remains unchanged, only the costume has been swapped. And if you ever wonder why the modern elites still flaunt wealth, it is not a new vice. In medieval Europe, displaying wealth was a moral obligation. Luxurious clothing, lavish feasts, and grand castles not only demonstrated power, but were considered proof of being favored by God. Today, we call it lifestyle marketing. Sports cars, luxury watches, and Instagram yachts are the spiritual descendants of those boisterous drinking feasts. One thing that makes the Middle Ages and the modern world similarly frightening. Both have invisible rules that everyone follows, but no one questions. Back then, people believed in the power of the church. Today, we believe in the power of trends. The only difference is that instead of being judged by priests, you are judged by your followers. And as a strange loop of history, what we call progress is sometimes just a new version of old obedience, only now packaged in LED lights and modern fonts. So when you feel truly free, ask yourself, is that really the case? Because very likely, even the way you eat, speak, rest, love, or work, all are shaped by people who lived, died, and prayed 1,000 years ago. The Middle Ages never disappeared. It just learned to hide in the modern in cliques, in suits, and in social rules you call civilization. But it's not just the grand rituals or ancient customs that have survived. Even the way we live, eat, dress, and bow to authority are small medieval legacies that we never question. Let's start with something seemingly harmless, the titles Sir, Lady, Mr. Part of modern politeness, right? But in reality, they originated from the feudal class system, a world where how you were addressed determined whether you ate meat or just moldy bread. The word sir once referred to those who had been knighted, a title that could be bought with loyalty or with someone else's blood. And lady was not a subtle compliment, but a social certificate showing you could afford to hire others to do your laundry. And then, like everything medieval, the nobility turned language into a symbol of power. Just a word like sir or madam meant you acknowledged your lower status. It's funny that centuries later we still say sir and madam, as if we were opening a feast for kings. Only now, instead of swords and armor, we have ties and business cards. If you think these titles are just politeness, try observing modern power structures. Titles like Mr. President, Director, or Chairwoman all are direct descendants of the feudal hierarchy. Your status is still tied to how others address you, and sometimes the title matters more than the work itself. The Middle Ages taught us this. Status is not something you earn through ability, but something recognized by others through ritual. And even today in companies, this is suspiciously true. But if language carries the breath of feudalism, our urban lifestyle carries the shadow of monasteries. Look at the concept of fixed working hours. Yes, you're not imagining it. The alarm clock every morning is a descendant of the medieval church bell. In European monasteries, life was regulated by prayer hours, matins, lauds, prime, terce, a strict schedule designed to remind humans they were small before God. When industrialization began, factories realized they didn't need God, only the bell. And so instead of calling you to church, the bell called you to your desk. Today, we no longer kneel before statues of saints, but we still bow to our phone screens at the same hour every morning. The only difference is that in the Middle Ages, at least people were promised heaven. Even the way we celebrate birthdays has medieval roots. Blowing out candles, making wishes, sounds sweet, right? But in the 14th century, candles did not symbolize joy. They were meant to ward off evil spirits. Each candle lit was a prayer against demons, and the cake symbolized life, a luxury only the wealthy could afford on special occasions. Peasant children had no cake, no candles, only another year survived. And then the modern world, in a frenzy of sugar and buttercream, turned the exorcism ritual into a cute birthday party. A perfect example of how history doesn't disappear, it just wears frosting and candy decorations. As for clothing, every time you tie a tie or wear high heels, you are honoring medieval pains. High heels were originally invented for men riding horses. Persian nobles and later European aristocrats used them to stand steadily on stirrups while shooting arrows. When French royal fashion discovered this, they turned it into a symbol of power, literally, those on top. Louis XIV even decreed that only nobles could wear red heeled shoes. Today, every time you wear high heels to the office, you are not only sacrificing comfort for aesthetics, you are repeating a ritual of asserting class performed by those who believed 10-centimeter heels symbolized ultimate power. And then there is the signature, something you thought embodied individuality. In fact, the signature was once a symbol of submission. In the Middle Ages, most commoners were illiterate, so they signed with an X to show, I agree to this, even if I don't know what I am agreeing to. The church and nobility turned the X into a sacred symbol, representing the cross. Today, you still sign contracts, agreements, and legal documents, an act that seems independent but carries the echo of centuries of obedience to power. Every signature, in essence, is still a modernized oath of allegiance. And finally, perhaps the most familiar symbol of medieval power, the chair, specifically the great chair, or as we call it today, the executive chair. In European courts, only kings and clergy were allowed to sit in chairs with backs. The people, whether guests or attendants, had to stand. The chair was a physical declaration of status. The one who could sit had the power to command. From this came the concept of chairman, the one with the chair. And today, whenever we say power chair, we are recalling the language of the throne. The modern office is just a castle without watchtowers, and that luxurious leather chair, it is a throne wrapped in Italian leather. It's ironic that after thousands of years of evolution, and we still live among the remnants of an era we consider primitive. We have replaced swords with contracts, armor with suits, churches with companies, yet we still bow, still rank ourselves, still believe that a few old rituals can keep the world running. So next time you stand, shake someone's hand, tie your tie, or draw the curtains to sleep, remember, you are not just living in the present. You are living in a more sophisticated version of the Middle Ages. Only now, the robes have been ironed flat and emblazoned with company logos. However, amid the golden glimmering vaults and echoing chants of the churches, Renaissance Rome was not just the capital of faith, it was also the center of power, desire, and divine negotiations. The popes were not merely successors of St. Peter. They were political bosses, art patrons, and in many cases masters at turning sin into profit. They ruled not only the human soul, but also their wallets. Behind every angel statue was a bill. Behind every painting of the Virgin Mary was a sponsorship contract. Rome, the city of God, ran on money, lots of money, and salvation, like any luxury good, could be bought with gold. The 15th century saw the rise of a business even hell would have to bow to, the trade of indulgences. For ordinary people, heaven was a distant goal, but for clerics, it was a prime economic opportunity. The churches preached that your soul could be cleansed with money. A small donation to the church, and you would shave hundreds of years off purgatory, a marketing strategy that could not be more perfect. A coin in the box, a soul in heaven. This slogan could run on any modern advertising campaign. And if you think it sounds like a pyramid scheme, it is. Only here, the top tier is God. This wealth built great works. St. Peter's Basilica, the masterpieces of Michelangelo, Raphael, and Leonardo. But at the same time, it nurtured something else, corruption soaked in holy water. Many popes of that era did not live like monks, but like reborn Roman emperors. They had palaces, armies, and children, even though officially they were supposed to live celibate lives. Some threw all-night parties in the Vatican with wine, music, and less than holy guests. In Rome, the banquet of angels often resembled a banquet of wine gods. Faith might be the purpose, but pleasure was the lifestyle. And don't think only the clergy were caught in this whirl. The great artists we revere today, Michelangelo, Botticelli, Bernini, all lived thanks to the favor of power. Every painting on the Sistine ceiling carries a bargain between talent and politics. You could not paint God without the permission of those who claimed to speak for him. A small mistake in skin tone or how an angel was depicted could cost you your career, or worse, your head. Yet it was precisely that tension between art and dogma, between faith and desire, that gave birth to what we call eternal beauty. If the Middle Ages were the era of fear, the Renaissance was the era of beauty and subtle deception. Rome was adorned like a goddess, but behind the marble mask was a city that never slept because of intrigue. Powerful families like the Medici, Borgia, and Farnese turned the Vatican into a political stage. Becoming pope was not just a calling, it was a victory in the game of power. They bought votes, bribed cardinals, and sometimes, if everything failed, poisoned their rivals. When you hear someone say, God's will has been done, it is often a euphemism for someone having been removed. Rome of this period was where faith and sin blended like wine and blood. On the surface, people prayed for salvation, but in the shadows, they prayed for mercy for the things they were about to do next. There was no separation between the sacred and the worldly, only art that hid it beautifully. Sculptors carved saints while dreaming of secret lovers. Priests preached temperance while owning vast wine cellars, and pilgrims, after kneeling in penance, would buy charms to be safe. Yet amid this chaos, a strange thing happened. Humanity found itself again. When people began to question the church, they also began to trust reason. When they saw angels with human faces in Botticelli's paintings, they realized that the divine was not above, but within themselves. It was the moment when faith transformed into thought, a quiet revolution later known as the Enlightenment. And ironically, it was Rome's sins that pushed the world toward truth. Lavish baptisms, nude statues, papal scandals, all prompted people to ask, if this is the city of God, why does it look like Babylon? That question, echoing through monasteries, workshops, and lecture halls, shook the foundations of church authority. Not because the artists wanted to overthrow divine rule, but because they wanted to understand humanity. Today, we look up at the Sistine Chapel ceiling and marvel at its beauty, forgetting that it was created amid scandal and corruption. But perhaps that is what makes it great. For in the chaos of Rome, beauty was not a gift from God, it was humanity's response to darkness, a way of saying we can still create the divine, even when the world around us rots. So when you stand in a gilded church gazing at angelic paintings, remember that what you are witnessing is not just faith, it is humanity's resistance. Renaissance Rome was not a place where souls were saved, but where we learned to save ourselves. And perhaps that is the real miracle. Amid sin, power, and deceit, humans still found a reason to believe in beauty. There is an irony about Rome in that era. The more it preached salvation, the more the city was obsessed with sin. People believed that God watched from above, but amid the golden domed ceilings and angelic statues, it was humanity that created another kind of heaven, a heaven of sensuality, power, and unconfessable desires. When sunlight streamed through the dome of St. Peter's, it did not only illuminate the scriptures, but also the carpets hiding countless stories that official history never dared to write. Inside the cold stone walls of the Vatican, the sound of prayers mingled with quiet laughter. Corridors that were supposed to echo only the footsteps of saints became secret passageways for midnight meetings. The cardinals, supposed pillars of virtue, began to understand that power did not come from purity, but from the ability to conceal the truth. They preached restraint in the morning and signed political agreements at night, while red wine and solemn oaths melted together under flickering candlelight. In Rome, morality was not a value, it was a currency. People could buy forgiveness, trade sin for silver and gold, and turn faith into a business. Pilgrims came to repent, while the powerful exploited religion to justify all their desires. A murderer could be absolved if he paid the right price, while a girl who dared to love the wrong man could be condemned forever. The scales of justice tipped according to the weight of gold, and the place deemed the heart of God beat instead to the rhythm of human desire. In that world, courtesans were not merely alluring women. They were masters of the game. While clerics were bound by vestments and vows, they roamed freely through lavish banquets, becoming the center of every story and rumor. They studied philosophy as if dancing and discussed theology as if flirting. With every glance, every word, they tilted the balance of power in an empire. Some of them understood better than anyone else that in Rome, beauty was not just a gift, it was a weapon. No one mentioned them in church records, but the paintings of the era quietly told their stories. Hidden in depictions of saints were the faces of lovers, and in every gaze of the Virgin Mary, a trace of real women could be found. Art became a place where sin and faith reconciled, a place where humans sought redemption through beauty. Michelangelo could paint angels on the chapel ceiling, but he also confessed that human beauty was the closest thing to divine he had ever known. And so, Rome at that time was not only a center of religion, but also a throbbing heart of art and sin, intertwined like two inseparable halves. Meanwhile, outside, the crowd still bowed their heads in prayer. They did not know, or perhaps did not want to know, that those they revered were dancing at balls behind closed doors. Yet it was this silence that gave Rome its power. Everyone knew, but no one dared to speak. It was collective complicity, built on faith, fear, and habit. Rome continued to operate like a stage where everyone played their part, whether priest, sinner, or lover. Yet within all of this, the most compelling aspect was not the decadence, but the contradiction. People of that time did not see themselves as hypocrites. They truly believed they could love God and earthly pleasures at the same time. To them, faith did not exclude desire, it made desire more sacred. This created the peculiar beauty of Renaissance Rome, a city where good and evil coexisted and sometimes even shook hands. Women like Imperia or Tullia did not oppose religion. They simply learned to live authentically in a deceitful world. They understood that power did not lie in obedience, but in the ability to manipulate rulers with tools they would never acknowledge: charm, intelligence, and secrecy. They were diplomats, poets, and sometimes storytellers, keepers of truths that male historians deliberately ignored. No one crowned them, yet a single glance could make a cardinal tremble. And perhaps that is what made Rome immortal. Not holiness, but the capacity to live with contradiction. A city that sang hymns and hosted balls, built churches and brothels, prayed and sinned, and all of it persisted as a unified whole. In that chaos, Rome discovered the truest nature of humanity: weak, yearning, and always seeking to justify itself. If you look closely, you will see the rules, rituals, and moral forms we still practice today were largely born in that era. Extravagant weddings, church ceremonies, even the concept of public image, all are legacies of a time when appearance mattered more than substance. And so, centuries later, we are still playing the same game that Rome perfected long ago, acting as saints in a world full of sin. Yet, surprisingly, even in the shadow of gilded churches and confessions priced in gold, Rome continued to produce those who believed with purity. While the nobility wore satin robes and quoted the Bible in drunken tones, in dark alleyways, poor painters, forgotten monks, and solitary pilgrims whispered sincere prayers. They were the small souls who kept the city from sinking completely into the abyss. Perhaps Rome survived through the centuries not because of the popes or powerful families, but because of these ordinary people, those who still believed that amidst the ruins of sin there was room for salvation. But Rome is a cunning creature. It never truly dies. It merely transforms. When waves of religious reform began to rise from the north, threatening to engulf the Vatican in a storm of rebellion, the city did not tremble. It adapted. The church, once the most skilled merchant of sin, now traded in something else: fear. On the walls of churches, gigantic apocalyptic paintings were created, not only to glorify God, but to remind the crowd that hell awaited those who dared question the power of the Vatican. Artists were tasked with creating terror through color and light, and they did so brilliantly. The nude figures once painted by Raphael with tender glances were now reborn by Michelangelo in scenes of torture and destruction. Botticelli's angelic faces vanished, replaced by souls burning in the flames of judgment. Art was no longer a celebration of beauty, but a weapon. And like all other weapons of Rome, it was wielded with deadly grace. The faithful were terrified. They knelt, contributed, and confessed, no longer out of belief, but out of fear of abandonment. Yet as they bowed, the artists smiled, for they understood that no matter how hard the church tried, beauty could not be controlled. A painting might be commissioned to instill fear, but sometimes a single brushstroke in the right place could convey the opposite: compassion, empathy, and even a quiet rebellion. It was during this period of the closest scrutiny that Roman art became most powerful, because it learned to speak the truth through metaphor. In the 16th century, as Europe shook with reform movements, Rome responded with an explosion of opulence. Squares were expanded, monuments arose, and every paving stone was placed as a statement: we are still the center of the world. But beneath the marble lay countless graves, those silenced, exiled, or burned alive for daring to say that God was not in the Pope's purse. Some were monks, some were scholars, and some, ironically, were women. In an era when women were forbidden to preach and considered weak, a few still stood, wrote, painted, and even spoke about sin and faith. They were not allowed to speak in churches, so they wrote in journals. No one printed their books, so they taught children, whispering lessons of compassion instead of fear. These small, forgotten voices sowed the seeds for later awakenings. And Rome, like an experienced lover, knew how to conceal all its wounds beneath a layer of rouge. The city continued to hold processions, coronations, and church concerts as if nothing were amiss. Yet each hymn was sung with a trembling voice, for even the singers knew they stood on the fragile line between faith and deceit. Rome never truly repented. It only learned to play the penitent perfectly. When artists began experimenting with light and shadow, a technique called chiaroscuro, Rome realized it no longer needed to hide sin. It only needed to illuminate it at the right angle. Darkness became a tool. Light was no longer a symbol of God, but a selective, artificial gaze. A critic centuries later said, Rome of that time did not cleanse the darkness, it learned to pose with it. And it is hard to disagree. The most powerful understood that if sin was inevitable, it was best turned into ritual. Dances became charity balls. Lavish feasts were veiled as honoring the saints, and bribery was called contribution. The entire city lived in an organized deception, but a stylish deception, meticulously staged like a divine play. The Romans did not repent. They performed repentance. They did not seek salvation. They wore it like a piece of jewelry. And thus Rome survived, not through faith, but through its unparalleled talent for turning artifice into tradition. Yet from that decayed soil, the modern world was born. When artists grew weary of serving the church, they began painting the real human. When scholars tired of being controlled, they turned to reason. When the faithful ceased believing in indulgences bought with gold, they began seeking God within themselves. Every small fragment of Rome, every crack in faith, unwittingly paved the way for the Enlightenment, a new era where intellect, art, and freedom of thought began to replace the fear of divine authority. Rome never truly fell, it merely transformed. The city that once lived on sin now lived on the memory of sin. Tourists who gaze at churches, marveling at Renaissance art, seldom realize that each statue, each ceiling fresco, is the product of hundreds of years of ambition, desire, and sin baptized in paint and marble. And perhaps that is precisely what makes Rome immortal, for nowhere else in the world understands human nature so well, where sin is sung with angelic voices and forgiveness is sold with a gentle smile. By the time you are old enough to stand in the real circus, the cheering is no longer imaginary. It is like a storm born from greed, belief, and blood. The sun pours fire onto the sand, dust rises like battlefield smoke, and the screeching of wheels through the air mingles with the smell of iron, sweat, and incense burning from nearby temples. This is not just a race, it is a sacrificial ritual where every soul, whether in the stands or on the chariot, throws itself into the game of the gods. When Dominus tightens the reins around your hips, he says nothing. His eyes signal, there is no turning back. You take a deep breath, hear the horses snort, feel their heartbeat merge with yours. And then, as the flag falls, the world explodes. Sand flies like tongues of fire. The crowd roars like a stormy sea. You lean, pull the reins, and everything dissolves into sound and motion. No Rome, no identity, only speed and survival. The chariots fly like arrows, collide, crushing each other's wheels. A misstrike, a wrong curve, and you might see blood splash onto the golden sand. The crowd roars, not out of pity, but out of excitement. In this world, death is entertainment, and the Roman Empire understands this better than anyone. People come to see blood, to feel that, though their lives are ordinary, they can touch glory, even if only through the death of another. You learn one thing. Rome loves the dead beautiful, and any charioteer who dares to challenge fate, even for a second, will have their name etched in the city's memory. No religion is stronger than loyalty to a faction's colors. Blue and green, two mortal enemies. They do not only race on the sand, they fight in the streets, burn houses, and assassinate each other at night. Empires may fall, emperors may be murdered, but the racing teams endure. In a sense, Circus Maximus is Rome, where faith, politics, and madness merge into one. Charioteers like you know this well. Every lap is not just a test of physical strength, but a power game between families, between the ruling class and the masses. A victory can make a faction wealthy overnight, but it can also push you into a grave if you choose the wrong ally. You begin to understand. Rome never cares who is good or bad. Rome only worships the victor. Sometimes at night, when the day's cheering still echoes in your mind, you think of your horses. You stroke their necks, see the scars, see their eyes reflecting yourself, tired, weary, and alone. They are no different from you. Both of you are bound to the wheel of fate, running to exhaustion just to give Rome a few more minutes of delight. But that is also the cruel beauty of this game. It turns weak creatures into legends. They say that in Rome, there are two kinds of people, those who watch the race and those who are raced. You are the latter, but in that moment, when the wheels sweep around the curve, when the stands tilt with you, when the entire city holds its breath, you touch something no emperor can buy, the right to live as a legend, even if only for a few minutes. Philosophers may speak of virtue, politicians may debate power, but in the arena, all of that vanishes. There, Rome reveals its truest nature, noble yet savage, magnificent yet cruel. People like you, bloodied, sweaty, scarred, are the true soul of the city. Not the marble statues or gilded temples, but the dusty racing laps where life and death coexist in a single breath. And then one day you win. Your chariot crosses the finish line amidst a storm of cheers. Your name echoes through the stands, thousands of voices merging as one. You raise your hand, and in that moment, Rome kneels before you. Not an emperor, not a god, but a charioteer born in dust and sweat. But victory in Rome is a double-edged sword. They will cheer you, crown you, invite you to feasts with the nobility, then forget you the very next day if you lose. In this city, glory is never kept, only consumed. And you begin to understand. Rome never truly loves anyone. It only loves the excitement that humans create for it. Sometimes you see popes and nobles pass the track, lips murmuring prayers, hands holding rosaries, yet their eyes fixed on the blood in the sand. You smile. They are like you, only wagering souls instead of lives. Everyone in Rome races in their own arena, some with chariots, some with faith, some with fame. No one escapes. As night falls, you lie in the stables, listening to the horses' heavy breaths, feeling your heartbeat in sync with theirs. Rome is still loud out there, but in this darkness, you realize a truth no philosopher has dared to write. Freedom is not being free from chains, but learning to make them sing to the rhythm of your own heart. And that is why Rome is eternal. Not because of power, not because of religion, but because of its people. Souls who know how to turn pain into art, fear into passion, and even sin into legend. Death, it turns out, is not as frightening as being forgotten. That is something charioteers understand better than any philosopher in Rome. Every time the wheels touch the sand, you are not just fighting your rivals, you are fighting the silence waiting for you behind. All the medals, all the wreaths will eventually rot. Only the roar of the crowd is immortal. And so, you race. Race until your breath becomes a blade and your heart beats faster than the hooves of horses. When Felix, your green rival, lunged onto the track that day, his eyes were no longer human. They were the gaze of death in human form. The wind lashes your face, dust swirls in a haze, and the crowd's shouting thunders like a storm. Every collision makes your wheels screech like screaming metal. Felix laughs, the cold smile of someone who knows that destruction is also a performance. He forces his chariot close to yours at the third curve, where the sand is finest and the wheels most likely to slip. You feel the impact surge through your body, strong as the blow of a god. A horse neighs loudly, then a strap snaps. In an instant, you cannot distinguish sky from earth. The chariot tilts, the horses struggle, and the crowd leaps to its feet. No one shouts your name, only the immense sound of Rome, bloodthirsty, excited, never sleeping. But strangely, amidst the chaos, you stand again. Sweat mixes with blood, and sand clings to your face. Your lead horse is still alive, eyes wild, breathing heavily, ready to plunge into hell once more. You climb back onto the chariot, fasten the reins around your waist, and grip the yoke as if choking fate itself. This time, the crowd roars, not for victory, but for defiance against death. Rome loves that more than anything else. Felix looks back. In the evening light, you see his smile dissolve into fear. You surge forward, two chariots side by side, Whips cracking, horses frothing, everything blurs. Only the horses breathing and your heart's frenzied pounding remain. When Felix turns to avoid the barrier, you pull the reins so hard the leather rips your hands. His chariot crashes into the central wall, wood splintering, wheels breaking apart, and a dry crack sounds like divine judgment. Silence. Then Rome erupts. Your name, shouted thousands of times, echoes throughout the city. They throw flowers, gold, and even curses. You lift your head, but instead of happiness, you feel emptiness. Felix is dead, and with him, a part of you dies too. In the circus world, there is no place for mercy. Blood is the ticket in. That night, Rome celebrates your victory with wine and music. Nobles raise their cups, poets compose verses, and you sit in the stables, silent. The horses sleep soundly, while you watch the flickering oil lamp like a heart about to stop. Dominus Faconus comes to you, places a hand on your shoulder, and whispers, "You did it, Maximus. You have surpassed death." You do not answer, because inside you know, no one surpasses death. We only delay it lap by lap. At dawn, slaves clean the sand, sweep away blood and shattered wood. The circus returns to peace, as if nothing happened. Felix's name is erased from the leaderboard, but Rome continues to cheer. That is the cruel truth of this empire. No one is immortal. Even legends are forgotten when the wind changes direction. From that moment, you begin to understand. What Rome calls glory is really just a clever game between fear and belief. People believe each victory is a blessing from the gods. But you know better. The gods are only the first audience. The rest is skill, sweat, and luck. Rome needs heroes, but heroes only exist as long as the crowd applauds. Years pass, and you continue to race, to win, to smile at the wreaths. But each time the sand flies, you remember Felix, remember the shattering wood, and remember that behind every grandeur is a nameless grave. Your body begins to betray you. Wrists stiffen, ribs ache when the cold hits. Rome does not love aging. It only loves speed. One day when you see a boy just learning to drive in the stables, his eyes mirror your own from years ago, eager, fearful, and shining. You hand him the reins and whisper, "Do not race to be remembered, race to understand who you are." The boy does not understand, but you smile. Rome never stops. It only changes storytellers. At dawn over Circus Maximus, you step onto the track alone. Cold sand beneath your feet, wind carrying the scent of wine, blood, and flowers. You hear the echo of hooves in memory. Aquila, Nero, Pallas, Flame. Four spirits still run around you like stars in the sky. And in that moment, you realize immortality does not lie in victory, but in surviving through defeat. Rome may fall, monuments may crumble, but as long as someone remembers the sound of sand torn beneath wheels, your name lives on. Not on a golden plaque, not in poetry, but in the heartbeat of the city itself, where madmen have turned fear into art and death into song. You lift your head, watching the first light touch the dome of Jupiter's temple. Every grain of sand here has once been soaked in blood, but also once supported legends. And you, Maximus, are one of them. Not because you won, but because you dared to race, knowing its price. Rome will forget everything, and that is why Rome will never die. You have learned to feel life in the moment, every heartbeat, every sway of the wheel, every snort of the horse. Each lap is a lesson in time, in decisiveness, in how a human can control chaos without being swallowed by it. When your hands grip the reins tight, eyes fixed on the marker, everything else disappears. Only you, the horse, and the fire-red sand beneath the wheels remain. You learn to anticipate disaster before it strikes, read your opponent's gestures like wordless maps, understanding that a small mistake can turn victory into destruction. The curves near the finish allow no delay. There, luck becomes fragile, and the circus transforms into a game reserved only for those who have learned to treat death as an ally. You hold the reins tightly, feeling every vibration through your hands and body, every movement of the horse like thunder warning of a storm. Too wide, the wheels slip; too narrow, you crash into the wreckage. There is no middle path, only victory or annihilation. Accidents behind you, the screams of rivals drowned in the sound of hooves and the crowd's roar remind you that mercy does not exist here. Compassion is for poets and priests, not for those risking their lives on the track. Each fall is a silent vow to Neptune. You pray by racing fast, by placing your fortune on the line, by knowing that one day that rope will break. And when it does, you will no longer be a living legend. But before that day comes, You are allowed to feel the thrill of the crowd, the echo of victory, the sweet taste of fame filling every drop of sweat. Rome does not worship the safe. Rome worships those who dare to live wildly, and you, with every lap, every victory, have proven it. When stepping from slavery to freedom, you understand that victory is not just money or titles, it is power, the ability to master your own fate. Bags of silver, wreaths, luxurious cloaks, and golden cups once reserved for generals are now yours. You have bought freedom, your own house, your own horses, and the respect of those who once despised you. Those who once spat at your feet now bow. Senators nod, pretending not to remember the past. But you know they do remember, and in every smile of yours lies a reminder to them you are no longer a slave. The parties last until dawn with music, wine, and passionate blessings. Women, from nobility to widows, seek to be near you, not only for love, but for the legend. Those you touch become more precious than any treasure. But with fame comes loneliness. You learn that Rome does not love you. It only loves the story about you, the legend you have become. You are a shining star in a sky full of smoke and fire, but even stars fall. In the golden light of the circus, you see young riders training with the eagerness and daring you once had. They race without knowing fear, without knowing exhaustion. They call you a veteran, half out of respect, half out of pity. In their eyes, you see the ghost of yourself, youth, ambition, courage, and despair etched into every muscle. The track has not changed, but you have. Older, warier, and realizing that the sand beneath the wheels, once promising immortality, can now swallow you at any moment. Yet the addiction to speed remains. The next morning, you wrap your raincoat tightly around your waist and step into the sunlight, feeling the hot, burning sand, the pounding of hooves, the scent of sweat and torch smoke. You are no longer young, but when the horses surge forward, your heart races as it did at 20. Reins taut, eyes fixed on the curve. You know luck brought you here, and only skill will keep you alive. Accidents happen. The crowd cheers, not out of sorrow, but in awe of the survival instinct that has pushed you beyond your limits. You fall, body shattered, yet your spirit races with the thunder, with the heartbeat of Circus Maximus, with Rome itself. Beneath the city walls, a small monument is erected in your honor. The inscription reads, "The one who rode with the gods, the one who fell like a storm, and somewhere beyond the roar of the circus, you still race, forever chasing the thunder." You become part of the city, of the circus, of a legend no one can erase. Every victory, every lap, every collision is etched into Rome's memory. And like the Nile to Egypt, the circus shapes your life and the lives of those around you. It brings survival and destruction, complete as a divine rhythm, where each farmer, each charioteer, each spectator contributes to a living machine. You understand that survival, fame, and legend do not come from mere luck. They are the result of skill, instinct, and the courage to face death, knowing that every moment could be the last. You have become Dominus Aurige, Lord of the Charioteers, but also a victim of the legend you created. Rome does not love heroes, it loves the story they leave behind. And when the last wheel stops turning, when sand covers the final footprint, you still exist, not only in memory, but in the lifeblood of the city, where fortune and death always walk together, and where legend is forged with blood, sweat, and red sand. When the first canals wound through the fields, when water from the Nile overflowed into the basins, Egypt did not merely learn to survive, they learned to harmonize with nature. Each stream of water was a heartbeat of the kingdom, a lesson in patience, in anticipation, in coordination. The workers, the engineers, and the farmers were not simply controlling the water. They were teaching themselves to read the language of earth and water, learning to turn potential floods into blessings. With wooden shovels, stone hoes, wicker baskets, and calloused hands, they created an irrigation network that not only saved the crops, but also shaped the very structure of society. The low earthen walls surrounding the basins did not merely retain floodwaters, they marked the boundaries of a new order where everyone knew their role, from farmer to priest, from engineer to scribe. The water, once wild and unpredictable, now followed precise plans, yet it retained the power of surprise. When the water was too low, and famine threatened each village. When the water rose too high, fields, even small villages, disappeared beneath the flood. The Egyptians learned that true power was not in forcing nature, but in making it a partner. They measured it, predicted it, and adjusted the irrigation work so that each flood season was no longer a disaster but a rhythm. Each year, from the rising of Sirius, from the dim light of dawn over Heliopolis to the adjustment of the canals, Egypt immersed itself in that rhythm as part of an eternal flow. Irrigation was not merely a technical skill, it was a living curriculum for society. Thousands of workers dug canals, built dikes, transported soil and rock, divided flood zones and basins, all under the close supervision of engineers and scribes. These people recorded every trace of water, every water level, every variation in soil fertility in texts and on stone stelae. Every drop of water became an asset. Every flood was managed as a precious resource. Life and death rested in the hands of the water keepers, and that power belonged not only to the pharaoh, it belonged to the community, where each action was coordinated precisely, from the farmer lowering the canal gates to the engineer adjusting the stone dams so that everything harmonized into a rhythm respected by both nature and humans. This harmony also opened deeper veins of culture and spirit. Ancient Egypt did not live by water alone, they worshipped water. The floods were the embodiment of the gods, and controlling the water was proof of the pharaoh's divine power. When a new canal was dug, when a basin was expanded, it was not merely an engineering project. It was a declaration of unity between nature, the divine, and human society. A network of waterways stretching for miles could feed a province, spark the growth of a town, even alter the balance of power between distant regions. In every drop of water, every flood, Egypt learned to organize society. No absolute command could exist without coordination and collective labor. When the waters returned, thousands were mobilized to adjust the flow, divert water to the fields, open canals, close dikes. When the flood season passed, surveyors stepped into the mud to redraw the boundaries washed away by the waters, remap the land, and prepare for the next planting season. It was in this repeated rhythm that Egyptian civilization found stability. Each season was a cycle of death and rebirth, each field a testament to the ability to transform wild nature into planned order. Yet not everyone recognized the value of this rhythm. The seemingly silent efforts, from lifting each bucket of water with a shad lever to running the Sakia water wheel with ox power, accumulated into a miraculous operating system, turning chaos into life, sweat into civilization. Thus, a child in the southern basin could see wheat sprout from the damp clay, while granite blocks were transported from the upper reaches to build pyramids in the north. Every stream became a thread connecting everything: humans, plants, stones, gods, and time. Over generations, the ability to anticipate, regulate, and optimize the flow became more than technique. It became philosophy. Egypt did not oppose nature, they harmonized with it. Each flood, each harvest, each newly dug canal was proof of that harmony. The river was no longer an unpredictable force. It was a teacher, an ally, the heartbeat of a great civilization. Ordinary people, through labor and intellect, transformed water into order, survival into art, and a muddy river valley into a magnificent kingdom where power, divinity, and life intertwined. The strength of ancient Egypt did not come from war or gold. It came from water, from the ability to read the flow, from the organization and cooperation between humans and nature. The river taught them to anticipate, to coordinate, and to live within an eternal rhythm that no king or deity could resist. Here, on these vast riverbanks, Egypt created a civilization whose every achievement, from the pyramids to the irrigation system, testified to wisdom and respect for nature. With every spade of earth, every canal, every small dam, Egypt proved a timeless truth. Humans do not need to conquer nature to become great. They only need to understand, harmonize, and cooperate with it. Thanks to the Nile, they transformed chaos into order, danger into blessing, and labor into a living civilization, enduring forever. Every pulse of the river taught the Egyptians how to measure, how to regulate, and how to live within the order granted by nature. From the ropes stretched across the fields after floods, from the fine black silt, they created an entire system of profound knowledge, where mathematics, engineering, and religion were intertwined. The rope stretchers did not merely measure distances, they measured time, vitality, and the fate of an entire kingdom. Every knot on the rope, every plot of land delineated, was a measure of life, a rhythm repeating endlessly. From these measurements, the fields were formed, temples were constructed, and the foundations of ancient tombs were laid with astonishing precision. Angles and proportions became the language of the universe, and farmers, engineers, and even scribes all read and wrote in that language. The cubit measures on stone pillars, carved at temples such as Elephantine and Philae, are evidence of transforming natural phenomena into usable data. They warned farmers when water levels were too high and reminded them to prepare when floods were low, avoiding famine. For engineers, these numbers were merely the rhythm of the river, but for priests, they were sacred messages, the voice of the gods. The entire society, from the pharaoh to ordinary people, relied on this accuracy. One miscalculation, one inaccurate forecast, and an entire harvest could vanish, bringing the risk of rebellion and political instability. Thus, surveyors, engineers, and scribes, though wearing no crown, held the fate of Egypt firmly, like the silent gods of stability. This precision was not limited to agriculture or irrigation. It flowed into every structure of civilization. Every brick in the pyramids, every loaf of bread baked in the oven began with the measurements of the rope stretchers. Mathematics and geometry became the bridge between chaos and order, between divinity and humanity. They understood that the order of Egypt did not come from kingship or war, but from the ability to maintain balance with the river. And that river, Happy, the blue skinned, fertile, and generous god, was the source of life, the voice, and the heartbeat of the kingdom. Each flood season was a ritual, each drop of water a prayer. When priests offered bread, beer, and flowers to the river, they did not merely please Happy, they confirmed that the rhythm had been maintained. The river, through the irrigation works, became a controlled system, yet retained its spirit and natural power. The black silt, Kemet, was a priceless gift, the handwritten message of the gods that the Egyptians had learned to read. From this mud, their civilization arose. It not only nourished the crops, but also shaped the cities, where villages were placed on high ground while the fields along the river became deep green ribbons, rhythmic and balanced. The irrigation system did not stop at delivering water to the fields. It was a sophisticated network connecting all parts of society. When water flooded into the basins, the canals filled in a precise order, seeping slowly into the soil to ensure maximum fertility. This control mimicked the natural flow of the Nile, but under human hands, creating an artificial rhythm, a flow measured, predicted, and respected. Lifting water from the canal to higher fields with a shaduf lever or sakia wheel, the farmer not only used physical strength, but also geometry, coordination, and collective intellect. Each flood season, every activity was a lesson in coordination. Provinces, villages, and even temples became part of the system. A failure in one basin could affect hundreds of miles downstream, so coordination and reporting at all levels were essential. Priests used the Nilometer, a vertical pillar marked in cubits, to measure water levels and predict crop yields, tax revenues, and political stability. These measurements, originating from observing nature, became the scientific foundation for the entire civilization. Thus, the Egyptians learned to forecast, to coordinate, and to transform reverence into technique. The river was no longer a wild force, but a living partner, where each flood season, each drought, and each layer of silt was monitored and wisely utilized. Silt became writing, levers and wheels became symbols of knowledge, and altogether formed a perfect system of regulation and survival. The dug canals, basins, and dike systems from Nubia to the Delta were all expressions of cooperation between humans and nature. Each flood season, Egypt received not only water, but rhythm, life, and knowledge. Thus, the river became a teacher, where manual labor, geometry, and reverence combined to create an enduring civilization. In the pulse of the water, Egypt found immortality. Empires rise and fall over time, but the Nile flows, carrying silt, abundance, and order, and through it, a civilization learned to harmonize with nature, to turn water into power and rhythm into life. The Nile River was not merely a body of water. It was the living machine of an entire civilization, where science, religion, and politics blended into a continuous rhythm. This machine was not constructed from bronze or stone, but from human beings, from labor, coordination, and intellect. Tens of thousands of people, from farmers and engineers to scribes, worked in unison, following the rhythm of the river, creating a system whose power surpassed even stone or metal constructions. These invisible works, the canals, dams, basins, and dike systems, were the true wonders of Egypt, for they represented the absolute harmony between humans and nature, between labor and thought. Egyptian civilization was not built to conquer nature, but to think like nature, to read its heartbeat and speech, and from that, create an artificial yet vibrant order. The water, with its prolonged and powerful floods, was a challenge, but also a teacher. Even when the pharaohs passed away, when temples were buried by sand and the golden statues of Ramses drifted in the floods, the Nile maintained its rhythm. The farmers, even if they no longer remembered the names of the gods, still relied on the river's mercy and generosity. Ancient monuments weathered, but the irrigation system, the foundation of survival, persisted, continuing to shape life and social order. Egypt's greatest achievement was not the pyramids or the Sphinx, but the ability to harness water, turning it into a science, an art, and a philosophy of life. These techniques, which once sustained the builders of the pyramids, became a model for later civilizations. Greek engineers studied Egyptian canals, Roman surveyors borrowed measuring ropes and calculation methods. Medieval farmers across the Mediterranean still used shadufs and sakia wheels almost unchanged. Even the concept of the nilometer endured, although cubit measurements were forgotten. Simple irrigation acts, guided by careful observation and record keeping, became a science that the world could not forget. However, the Nile's power always carried two sides. Excessive control would strip the river of its generosity. Neglect for too long would allow chaos to return. Later rulers attempted to regulate it like the pharaohs, but through bureaucracy rather than religion, and that balance was often fragile. Thousands of years later, the British built dams and levees, continuing a dialogue that began with mud and stone. Modern engineers in Cairo, with satellite data and flow measurements, are the descendants of the ancient rope stretchers and engineers, still reading the river's rhythm in the way their ancestors did, through observation, calculation, and reverence. The true legacy of the Nile does not lie in monuments or myths, it lies in thought, in how the ancient Egyptians recognized that mastering nature was not about conquest, but about living according to its rhythm. They did not view floods as enemies to be defeated, but as companions to be understood. Their success was measured by continuity, the ability to sustain life year after year, generation after generation. While other empires dreamed of immortality through war and gold, Egypt achieved it quietly through water, silt, and order maintained across generations. Fields, canals, villages, and dike systems were not merely engineering works. They were the material expression of a philosophy of life, where labor, religion, and science converged. Fields were carefully divided, basins filled according to the natural rhythm of the flood, but under the skilled guidance of humans. Shadufs, sakia wheels, and other hydraulic levers transformed labor into a living rhythm, mimicking the natural flow yet controlled, ensuring fertility and stability. Each flood season, every agricultural activity was a lesson in coordination and order, where each worker, each village, and each temple played an essential role. Through the combination of engineering, mathematics, and observation of nature, Egypt learned to forecast, plan, and sustain life in a way few civilizations achieved. Silt, the black earth left by the Nile, was the handwritten script of the gods, a language they learned to read and write. Flood seasons became calendars, canals became arteries, and farmers were faithful interpreters of the universe's rhythm. Even the cities, from small villages to the capital, were arranged according to the rhythm of water, creating a landscape balanced between chaos and order, between humans and nature. Today, seen from above, the images of canals, crops, and villages reflect the lines etched on tomb walls thousands of years ago. The Nile still flows north, still deposits black silt, still whispers an ancient promise: live by my rhythm, and you will find immortality. Stone structures may erode, the Sphinx may be buried by sand, but the heartbeat of civilization, the pulse of the water, endures and is passed down to future generations. Ultimately, Egypt's greatest monument is not carved from stone, but created from the river itself, from the harmony between humans and nature, from the immortal rhythm of water and intellect.